Let us think about the Transfiguration in detail. An old proverb says, "The devil is in the details." We know what that means. If you overlook the fine points, you'll be sorry. But the angel might also be in the details. If you are attentive to the fine points, your understanding is enriched. That is true of Luke's Gospel in general, and of today's reading in particular. Today's Gospel is Luke's account of the Transfiguration. The story of the Transfiguration is in all the Gospels, in John implicitly. You have heard it many times. The various accounts may seem identical unless you attend to the details. It is helpful to compare today's reading from Luke's with the other Gospels. Matthew and Mark say that they went up the mountain 6 days later. Luke says 8 days. Numbers in Scripture are often not mathematical, but theological. Luke placing the Transfiguration 8 days later suggests a supernatural event beyond the natural, beyond the 6 days of the creation of the natural world. Luke places the Transfiguration in the context of prayer. The other Gospels say simply that they went up the mountain alone. Luke says Jesus took them up the mountain to pray, and while he was praying, he was changed. The other Gospels say that Jesus was transfigured. Luke does not use the term transfigured. He says simply, his face changed in appearance and his clothes became dazzling white. In Luke, the Transfiguration is Christ in union with God through prayer. Only Luke mentions that the disciples were asleep. The same 3 disciples also slept in the Garden of Gethsemane. The 3 disciples who witnessed the Transfiguration are the same 3 disciples who were present at the agony in the garden. Through the sleeping apostles, Luke connects the Transfiguration to the agony in the garden. That is significant. And finally, the most telling detail, all the Gospels say that Jesus was conversing with Moses and Elijah, but only Luke tells us what they were talking about. His exodus that he was going to accomplish in Jerusalem. Exodus is also translated as his passing, his departure, his passage. Luke's reference to the exodus of Christ recalls the exodus of the Hebrews, leaving the slavery of Egypt, wandering 40 years in the desert, and finally entering the promised land. Luke is telling us here that Jesus, Moses, and Elijah are talking about Christ departing from a sinful world, to be experienced most acutely on Calvary, to return to glory with the Father. And such a departure is an act of redemption, our salvation. Just as the Exodus freed the Hebrews from slavery, the Exodus of Christ, his death and resurrection, frees us from slavery to sin. All these details in Luke clearly associate the transfiguration of Christ with the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ. The other Gospels do so only implicitly. The story of the Transfiguration is read every year on the second Sunday of Lent. For many that seems misplaced, hardly a Lenten topic, more like Easter. But the details in today's Gospel from Luke show that the Transfiguration is related to the death and resurrection of Christ, his exodus, and therefore to our own wandering through the 40 days of Lent. This is the Paschal mystery, the most fundamental mystery of the Christian faith, the paradox of suffering and glory. The Paschal mystery is also the most fundamental mystery of our own lives. We struggle through difficulties to emerge a better person, a better Christian. The devil is in the details. The angel might also be in the details. Whatever your Lenten observance, if you are attentive to the details, you may also come to a share in the glory of the transfigured Christ.